Hi everyone, we're just going to start in a few minutes. Just waiting for the room to be, for everyone to join us in the room. Okay, good afternoon everyone. Hello and thank you for joining us. We have guests here from Israel, from India, from across the world. We're very excited to launch this event and we already have more than 100 people with us in the room and we're also broadcasting live on YouTube. My name is Gedalia Afterman, and I'm the head of the Asia Policy Program at the Abba Eban Institute for International Diplomacy. We are based in the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, which is Israel's leading private university. The Asia Policy Program is a policy-focused program aimed at shaping Israeli policy towards Asia and taking an active part in strengthening this relationship. India is especially important to us, so we're very delighted to launch this cooperation and especially to do it with the Takshashila Institution. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the Takshashila Institution and the Abba Eban Institution in joining us to launch this series of events titled the High-Tech Geopolitics Perspective from India and Israel. We are also very privileged to welcome Ambassador Malka, Israel's ambassador in New Delhi, and Ambassador Sanjeev Singla, India's ambassador here in Israel. We'll hear from them shortly. But before I begin, I would like to take a moment to briefly introduce our institutions and the objective behind this event and the whole series of events. The Takshashila Institution is an independent center for research and education in public policy. Takshashila is an independent, non-partisan think tank concerned with how India shapes the world and how the world shapes India in turn. Takshashila is also focused on transforming how India is governed and exploring the intersection of technology, economics, and politics. The Abba Eban Institute is a proactive research center at do tank, dedicated to the advancement of innovative diplomacy in Israel and beyond. We are focused on action-oriented practices and multi-sector approaches, and we have been shaping the future of diplomacy and Israel's global standing. As we speak, we'll be sharing some links to our institutions, to our programs, and to our newsletter, so please feel free to join. Now to today's event. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first of a series of events. We're going to have events every month for the next 4 or 5 months, with the aim of identifying and putting forward ideas for unlocking the potential for India-Israel cooperation, especially on innovation and technology. The rationale behind this, of course, comes not only from the rapidly evolving technology landscape, but also from the geopolitics behind it. Our goal is to bring policymakers, strategic thinkers, entrepreneurs, and innovators together for these conversations. We would very much welcome the audience, you, to join in the conversation. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to share in the Q&A function, and we'll try to include as many of your thoughts and questions in the discussion. Today's discussion is about the Israel-India relationship, innovating for the future. As I said, we're very fortunate to have both Ambassador Singla and Ambassador Malka joining us today to support this initiative. I would like to invite Ambassador Singla to begin by sharing some of his thoughts, followed by Ambassador Malka. Please, Ambassador Singla.
Thank you. Namaste and shalom, everyone. Let me begin by saying how happy I am to join you for this inaugural event that will kick off a series of monthly webinars on India-Israel relationship. And I'm particularly grateful to see that the Abba Eban Institute and the Takshashila Foundation have chosen to concentrate on the innovation sector and correctly identified it as a key pillar of our bilateral relationship. So let me leave you with three broad points on the why, the what, and the how parts of the topic. My first point about why our two countries are prioritizing innovation is that India and Israel's bilateral investment in innovation stems from a consciousness about three fundamental trends around us. A, politically, the challenge to distribution of power in the international system that is happening around us. There are larger geopolitical challenges that are underway, and these have come into a sharper relief during COVID-19 for both our countries, which are strategic partners, something that necessitates a strategic convergence between the two countries and other like-minded partners. India and Israel are located in two different geographies, but these are becoming more complex in geopolitical terms. B, economically, the disruption in the world economy that is taking place around us, uh, partly due to partial decoupling between the world's two largest economies, partly due to sentiment against unchecked globalization, partly due to climate change, and now partly due to COVID-19, necessitates that we explore complementarities that prepare us better for this huge and impending shift. And see, technologically, the acceleration in disruptive technologies around us, something that makes it important for our two countries to harness our mutual scientific and technological strengths to enhance the competitiveness of our economies. While some of these have a security and a strategic dimension, there are others with a larger humanitarian dimension, like the recent COVID-19 episode. And these span a broad spectrum, ranging from uh, cybersecurity, fintech, and health, apart from traditional areas of cooperation like water, agriculture, and defense. My second point about what is happening on the ground about this bilateral focus on innovation is that the real news in our relationship is actually our increasing cooperation in science and technology and innovation sectors. That is also necessary for our own socioeconomic transformation back home. Now, there is a lot to be said about the acronym which was mentioned by Prime Minister Netanyahu during his visit, I2T2, Indian Talent times Israeli Technology, equals India-Israel Ties for Tomorrow. Israel is an emerging leader in niche areas like biotechnology, biomedical engineering, uh, AI, and quantum computing. And given India's strengths in its vast scientific manpower and as a test bed for scaling technologies, there are immense opportunities. Israel is the original startup nation, while India has one of the world's largest startup ecosystems. And that's why our two countries have launched I4F 3 years ago. It's the $40 million India-Israel Industrial R&D and Innovation Fund focused on water, agriculture, health, energy, and ICT to foster collaboration between Indian and Israeli startups. And that's why the two countries are stressing on increasing the number of Indian students studying in Israel. And some green shoots are already visible in terms of success in both. Under I4F, we have 11 projects in various stages of progress, and two of these are now being scaled up in agriculture and health. In agriculture, the project entails development of energy efficient pumps and sensors for smart management of aquifers, and these are now being tested in Satara. And in health, it entails the use of AI in medical imaging for detection of tuberculosis. And it is now being steered as a project by Israel's Zebra Medical Imaging and our Apollo hospitals. And B, as for Indian students in Israel, their number is now over 1,200, including over 900 at PhD and postdoc levels, and mostly in STEM areas. This number used to be about 500 to 600 about 5, 6 years ago. And in fact, perhaps now we are the largest international student community in Israel. And C, we are also working closely in other areas. For example, space, where we are collaborating in in the area of electric propulsion system for small satellites and optical data links, cybersecurity, where the two countries are close partners. And we should remember that cybersecurity has in turn several verticals like banking, financial services and insurance, telecom and IT. And it is one of India's software giants, TCS, which is helping to increase the competitiveness of Israeli financial banking services by establishing a technology platform for new banks in Israel, such as the new digital bank, and is building a complete banking services bureau. Fintech, where India is one of the world's largest and fastest growing hubs. The Unified Payments Interface, or the UPI, is one of the biggest fintech innovations to have emerged from India. And a few weeks ago, I was reading the story of how an Israeli firm, Tarya Fintech, is collaborating with an Indian partner to benefit from this digital revolution in India. Health, where the two countries recently collaborated on tackling COVID-19, and I'm sure my colleague, Ambassador Malka, will speak about it in a moment. Energy, where Indian Oil has a joint venture with an Israeli startup, which is pioneering a new battery system for e-mobility. And that also has an ongoing collaboration with Mahindra Electric. There's another project being driven by iCreate between one of our largest auto component manufacturers and an Israeli startup in electric vehicle powertrain. AI and quantum computing, where several Indian entities are collaborating with Tel Aviv University. And these are just some illustrative examples. My last point about how we can sustain this thrust on innovation is that we are perhaps at a point where the existing institutional mechanisms, such as the I4F and the organic exchanges at the level of research scholars and young scientists, can soon attain a critical mass that can provide and sustain the required momentum. You have mentioned the chip challenge and cooperation in semiconductor supply chains as the subject for one of your panel discussions. I saw it in the program. Well, India's Ministry of Electronics and IT has recently invited expressions of interest for establishing a semiconductor fab in India. And hopefully we would see some proposals by Israeli entities. I think the sheer size of India's economy and its depth and diversification not only offer a huge scale for Israel, but also a base for exports to the rest of the world and for nearshoring supply chains. Our huge reservoir of scientific manpower combined with Israel's strengths in niche areas provide opportunities for R&D and design centers in India, as also for collaboration in new emerging areas like AI and quantum computing. And of course, both countries are vibrant democracies, something which is essential to inculcate a sense of irreverence which drives innovation. So with these words, let me stop here and wish you all the best for your discussion and endeavors. Thank you. Toda Rabba.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Singla. Indeed, as you mentioned, a lot of our events moving forward will go into detail on ways where we can expand cooperation on all the areas you mentioned. Ambassador Malka, please.
Good afternoon, colleagues in Israel. Good evening, colleagues in India. Ambassador Proso, Ambassador Singla, distinguished participants. I would start with first congratulating Abba Eban Institute and Takshashila Institute for taking this important initiative. As was mentioned before by my dear friend, Ambassador Singla, and I will try not to repeat things that he has said, but just maybe to complete and to add some, the ties, the relations between Israel and India has grown so much lately, and even more under the pandemic. And I think that Israel and India can be a shining example for other countries in the world, for how countries, friends, can joint efforts, joint research, work together, support each other, advance new initiatives and open new avenues for collaboration, especially under a challenge like a global pandemic. the joint research that we have conducted between Israel and India on rapid tests for COVID-19 was really something attractive, shining. I can share with you that just after we conducted this very complex operation here in India and managed within 9 days to take 25,000 samples for this important joint research, many ambassadors for other countries just reach out to me and ask me, how did we do that? How did Israel and India manage to do such a complex joint effort and operation? And I think that this is exactly the example for how Israel and India know how to work together, because these relations are based on very strong foundations of trust and respect, mutual trust and mutual respect, and our ongoing basis. So the relations are there. Our scientists are working continuously with scientists in India. Just the day before yesterday, the head of the DRD from Israel just visited here in India and met his counterpart, the PSA, Principal Scientific Advisor for Prime Minister Modi, and started new initiatives, new avenues for joint research and joint working. So just to give some, I would say, example for how we can work out together. And again, focusing on innovation is important. This is a main pillar for collaboration and huge potential for collaboration between Israel and India. First, as an economist, I can tell you that reality shows that those countries that focus on innovation are those that perform much, much better economically. Of course, we can attribute most of the success of the Israeli economy to focusing on innovation, which started from education and evolved to innovation, but now we understand that the future is embedded in innovation and technology, high technology. And while India and Israel are working together, they are not only that we don't compete each other, we complete each other. We come with new initiatives, new set of minds and thinking, share, and as I said, on mutual trust, mutual respect, will bring so much added value to each other, and it's a very positive sum game. What we do with India on innovation, and not only on innovation, supports the visions of Prime Minister Modi of making India for India and for the world, because India really needs to extend its export in order to become, and India will become eventually a $5 trillion economy. And we want to be part of this endeavor and this effort. And also by working together, joint research, and especially focusing on innovation and advanced technology, we make both countries more self-reliant. And what more than this global challenge, global pandemic showed us how much important it is for countries to be more self-reliant, open new supply chains, and be able just to supply and to provide to our people whatever we need in times of crisis. And again, we support each other and become, from this collaboration, much, much more self-reliant. Yes, we are taking many initiatives ahead, and Ambassador Singla mentioned them, but if I talk about innovation, just lately in this incubator I create in Gujarat that was mentioned before, we just 2 months ago signed an innovation MOU between Israel and India. One of the initiatives that started there is an electric motor, but again, we are bringing more and more new initiatives to that. And while these two esteemed institutions, Abba Eban Institution in IDC and Takshashila will work together, I'm sure that just by engaging the right people and raising the right initiatives, ideas, many new initiatives will start, and of course, just tap the huge potential that is there for collaboration between Israel and India. And as we well see, things are changing in the environment in the region, and now that Israel have signed the Abraham Accords with countries in the Gulf, for example, the UAE, which is again a leading country in West Asia in innovation and technology, thinks what they can bring to the table. Both Israel and UAE are key strategic partners of India. So we have new players that come to the table and brings much more added value. So once we advance the relations between Israel and India, for example, by this collaboration between the two institutions, we can add more value by adding other countries, other partners, other like-minded countries that can also participate and join with us. So I really want to congratulate you for this initiative. We are there to help, to support, to assist. If we will succeed to open any new path, any new avenue, to forge, to figure out new formulas for collaboration, it will be for the benefits, of course, of both countries and peoples. And I'm looking forward to see the fruits of this very congratulated initiative. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Malka and Ambassador Singla, for your insightful remarks. And of course, thank you so much for your support for this initiative. As you said, our intention is to create a strong platform for the future of the relationship in many areas with a focus on technology and innovation. So thank you again very much for helping us make it happen. We will now move to the second part of our program today, our panel discussion. Ambassador Proso?
Yes.
Please.
First of all, Ambassador Singla and Malka, thank you very, very much. And it's really interesting to hear you because you both go into the details, you know the details, especially on the economic stuff, the technological stuff. This is not in generalities. And I think it shows a lot on the transition of diplomacy into really bringing added values to society by cooperation between countries. And it's very impressive, and it also shows that the importance that we sometimes tend to marginalize when there's a really good relationship between Prime Ministers Modi and Netanyahu, and agreements are signed. Someone has to take those agreements that were signed and really implement them. And it's amazing, and I think we are both fortunate, Israel and India, to have both of you as ambassadors, because I could see that you're carrying this in the right way, and for me this is heartwarming. I want to go into something which I think explains, Israel a bit, startup nation. Where does it come from? And there are a lot of similarities also between Israel and India, but let me talk about Israel. Israel is very undisciplined. In the sense, we are an undisciplined people, and I see you smiling. And it begins in the family. Everyone talks out of turn. Everyone basically challenges Ron or myself in the table. I mean, the fact that we are the head of the family has no bearing on our children. They're all completely, and fully think that they know everything different. And it continues in kindergartens, in schools. When you enter an Israeli kindergarten or school, you put earplugs, because at the end of the day, it's vocal, it's a cacophony of voices, but what it produces is a challenge to the existing paradigms in everything. And I think this, at the end of the day, pushes innovation. And when you look even at the most, disciplined organization called the Israeli army, even in the army, there's in essence a lot of debates. We have managed structurally to create a situation where we are testing people at the age of 17 and basically saying, Gedalia has good mathematical skills, we'll put him in the intelligence and the encryption. Ron has good leadership skills, he'll go to the paratroopers. And in the sense, what you create is that structurally, we have the benefit of taking something which at the end of the day is a liability, hence the army, and turning it into an asset, because we position the best and the brightest, men and women, at a place where they can make a difference. Just think what an asset it is for a country to put those people on the front line, challenging the existing paradigms, and in essence, giving an answers to money that we have to anyhow allocate into the army comes out as spin-offs, and that's my point, into the civilian population. Now let me turn theory into practice. If we need to give answers to missiles from Iran, this is the base of our space program. If we need to basically protect our computers in both cyber and firewalls, this is the base for companies like Checkpoint. We use every dollar 10 times over. So in the sense, what Israel is good at is troubleshooting, research and development. If you need to run a company, don't get to Israelis. No, we take them somewhere else, because we don't know how to run anything in a structured way. Ron, you correct me, but I think except for Teva or Checkpoint, we don't really have companies that are run in an organized manner, because this is who we are. We also have to know who we are at the end of the day. But the culture of challenging and asking questions, and also the position of women in society, which is so unique to India and to Israel, not coincidentally, is Indira Gandhi and Golda Meir, one of the first prime ministers in the world, okay? When you look at societies, the position of women, in the sense, is crucial to understanding a society. And I think this also adds to things that are important for us and the way we look at things. So in Israel, when you look at Israel as a society, I think when, they promised the Jewish people, they promised us the land of milk and honey. When we got here, there was no milk, no honey, and no money. We had to, at the sense, to basically work, because there's no oil either, we had to work from the neck upwards. And I think that we've reached a situation today when I look at Nitin, and I look at what you guys are doing in India, there's a lot of things that we can cooperate with, because we are trying to find solutions, and I think we have the base in both societies to do that, to galvanize the amazing skills that we have. And again, truthfully, we have to say that, India is an elephant. We are a mouse in comparison to India. But like I told Nitin, we are sometimes a mighty mouse. And the thing is now to make sure how the mouse and the elephant work together in a way that can bring benefit to both sides. And I'm sure this is going to be the case. So, it's an opening remark. I feel very fortunate, and it's not coincidental, Nitin, that we picked you, you as a corporation, because we want the entrepreneurship spirit. We want the idea of technology, because I think this is a base where we can really move our relationship to a different level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was a perfect segue into our panel discussion, but I want to thank again.
Yeah, I'm paying his salary, so he's saying, a perfect segue.
But I want to thank again Ambassador Singla and Ambassador Malka for joining us, and thank you again for your support. Let us move into the panel now. I'll introduce Nitin Pai first. Nitin Pai is the co-founder and director of Takshashila Institute. His current research includes an interest in geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, defense economics, and the politics of radically networked society. He teaches international relations and public policy at Takshashila graduate program. Nitin is a widely published commentator and Indian international. Ambassador Proso, who, as he said, I work for, is the head of the Abba Eban Institute for International Diplomacy, the IDC Herzliya. Between 2004 and 2007, he served as the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Subsequently, Ambassador Proso spent 4 years as Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom and later served as Israel's 16th permanent representative to the United Nations from 2011 to 2015. Now, Ambassador Proso, you raised some of the questions, actually some of the issues I wanted to talk about in my first question. So, Nitin, I might ask you to talk a little bit about how you see India's connection to innovation. Where does India's interest in innovation come from? And how do you think that fits in with the Israeli character, and where can we cooperate? Where can we take that to enhance our cooperation?
Thank you, Gedalia. Ambassador Singla, Ambassador Proso, Ambassador Malka, it's a delight to have you on our event. And I hope this is the first step for a lot of interesting things that we have committed to do with the Abba Eban Institute. Now, I think talking about this, first of all, I think those of you who are in Israel and those of you who are on the show must know that I'm sitting here in Bangalore. You know, this is 2,000 kilometers away from New Delhi. Bangalore, just around me, in a 1 kilometer radius around me, this is a residential locality. I'm at home. And in a 1 kilometer radius around me, there are 10 co-working spaces, a couple of incubation centers, 2 or 3 venture capital companies have their headquarters nearby. And you know, every single street has homes available for people who want to rent it out to live or to start small offices. So, you know, I'm sitting in innovation central of India, right? Now, what's interesting is the reason I made this geographical connection is that 2,000 kilometers is just one way of looking at, you know, the geography, innovation geography of India. It's not, India is not one innovation engine. India has got the union government and it's got 30 states, hundreds of cities, and each of them are innovation centers in their own way. Each government, each society in that particular locality or in that particular state is part of an innovation ecosystem in its own way. The government of India's Niti Aayog publishes an annual innovation index, and Karnataka state, Bangalore where I am, has been again ranked as #1. But the action is not just in #1. Bangalore and Karnataka are #1, but there are other states. There's Maharashtra, there's Tamil Nadu, there's Kerala, there's Telangana and Andhra. So several states are making a serious play to become innovation engines on their own right. Because I think what has happened in the last 25 years is that the political economy has understood the value of having an innovation engine, innovation ecosystem in that state as not just a provider of jobs and economic activity, but also something aspirational for the population. So the connection of aspiration, ambition, and human talent has come together in many parts of India. And I think that is the new India innovation story. You know, why did India end up on as an innovation hub? Every human being in the world is innovative in his or her own right? So it's not that there's anything extraordinarily different between individuals. But what makes a difference is how it all comes together. To be an innovation hub, you need to be, you need to have some history which will get you there. It could be educational institutions, it could be previous industries which are there, it could be war, it could be, defense, it could be many things which create some kind of an initial starting condition. Then there is private investment, then there's public policy, and more importantly, minds, money, markets, and policy need to come together. Right? And that's the story which happened, I think, if you want to put it in a nutshell, what happened in India in the last 20 to 25 years. Minds, money, markets, and policy came together. They were aligned. Initially, I would think the government's role was really to get out of the way. In the early 90s, the government, as Ambassador Proso says, governments that try to help are pretty scary. So I think what happened in the 90s was, literally the government getting out of the way and allowing the entrepreneurship and industry to do what they wanted to do. India was opening up. Markets became real because of an open economy. Indians got richer, so you had a larger domestic market, and our companies could serve the domestic market. And what happened later was government investment in infrastructure, not necessarily directly, but in terms of telecoms, liberalization of the telecom policy, for example, which made possible for every single Indian today to have more than one phone, right? So I think there are about 700 to 800 million people who own a smartphone in the country today. That's a huge market, right? And this was made possible by public policy, which allowed infrastructure investments, and which still allow infrastructure investments. Now, the latest phase in this story is what I want to share you with. I think governments in the last 5 years or so, or probably a little longer, in the last 5 to 10 years, have understood that there are still some regulatory obstacles which prevent the coming together of mind, money, markets, and policy, right? And one of the newer innovations, of course, is for governments to invest in incubators, in ecosystems, hubs, incubators, accelerators, and so on, and funding, innovation funding, both as grants for research as well as venture money for companies. But the most interesting thing which has happened, and I think Karnataka has done that last year, is to create regulatory sandboxes. To say that, look, we will create spaces for you, not geographically, but in the regulatory space, where you will get a playground to do what you want to do. So the government rules, government regulations will not come in your way in a small, ring-fenced set of areas. And I think that is the next generation of government government policy in innovation. And I'm hopeful about this, because if you look at India, and I think what you mentioned about Israel to some extent is relevant to us also. We are sometimes oblivious of government and government laws and rules, except when government rules tell us not to do something. So I think we've crossed that stage, and many governments, both in states and the union level, are trying to create sandboxes wherein there is a greater amount of room for play for people to do innovation. So I think that's the story of Indian innovation. Gurcharan Das, a famous author, had a book called India Grows at Night, where he said that literally innovation in the economy take place despite the government. Now, there is some truth to that, but I don't agree entirely, because government has a very important role, and government has played a very important role in the Indian innovation story. Firstly, by getting out of the way. Secondly, by facilitating infrastructure investments. And now by trying to create sandboxes which allow disruptive innovations to take place. So that's the story. And I think we can talk about other things as we go along.
Thank you very much, Nitin. Ambassador, you want to add something, Ambassador Proso?
No, I think spot on.
Okay, so I understand that Ambassadors Singla and Ambassador Malka might have other commitments to attend to, so thank you again. And before we take some questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you, Ambassador Proso and Nitin, a broader question. I mean, we talked about technology and our interest in technological cooperation being motivated both by the actual development and the technological developments themselves, but also by geopolitics. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of the geopolitical developments we've seen recently in the world and in the regions, in our regions, and see how they play into technology, into Israel and India's role in that.
But maybe before that, if I may, when we have both ambassadors, Malka and Singla here, I think to add to what Nitin just mentioned, the government also in Israel at the beginning, and Ambassador Malka, you help me out here because you know the details better than I do, really helped out in matching funds, VCs. Today it looks like this is something, everyone comes and invests, but at the beginning, at the core time, the government really made it, made the right thing in both matching funds and giving the industry, the incubation, the innovative elements, the backing, in order to create today something that is, of course, the engine of Israel's export. So if both ambassadors would like to add to that, I think it's an important point that you mentioned.
Yes, I would like to comment on that. And yes, I totally agree with you, Ambassador Proso. I think that innovation, and at least in the beginning of these initiatives, the government should step in and consider it as a public good. What we know about economies is that sometimes the equilibrium that we get in the market is not the optimal one. And this is exactly the time when the government should step in. And if you're talking about investments, government should step in and give guarantees, gives, as was mentioned by Nitin, sandboxes or the playground that is fenced and hedged. So it will be much more attractive for investors to come and to step in. Talking about India, India needs really to create a structure of incentives to attract foreign direct investments, because the cumulative savings of India cannot support the needs of India for investments. So if we as Israelis come to India, work together, joint research, joint innovation, and want to scale up, we need the funds. So in order to support this initiative of Abba Eban Institute and Takshashila Institute of advancing the innovation ties between the countries, we need to see that we prepare the fertile ground for that. And this is also attractive because those kinds of innovations are capital intensive. So unless we build the structure of incentive that will attract the investors to come, we will not be able to take those initiatives to the next stage. Think, just for example, how did we, Israel, become the world leader in cybersecurity? We decided that we are going to be in this stage 15 years ago. I was there in the commission just when we thought, and we made a strategic plan for 15 years for Israel. And we realized that we need to focus on cybersecurity. So we tried different kinds of structures, of ecosystems that will attract not only the talents and the minds, but also the funds, the capital that is needed to advance the research, the innovation, the technology of cybersecurity. So now Israel attracts more than 20% of the cumulative investments of the world, the private investments of the world in cybersecurity. Fifth, 20%. Although Israel is also only 1/1000th of the world population, it attracts 20% of the world's investment in cybersecurity. So if we want really to advance the collaboration, the joint research and innovation between Israel and India, we need also to help, and this is where the government needs to step in. And when I talked before about figuring new formulas of collaboration, I meant also build a structure of incentive that will attract the funds that are needed to take these very blessed initiatives and to tap the potential and to bring the funds, the oxygen that is needed in order to take these initiatives ahead. So yes, I totally agree with you, Ambassador Proso.
No, yes, I too would concur in that. And I think Nitin mentioned it rightly when he said that while the government had the good sense to get out of the way to spur innovation, there are times when the government has to pave the way. And as Ron said, sometimes depending on the sector, the amount of capital required is just too huge for the private players to do it alone. iPhone would not have been possible had it not been for the massive amount of investment which the US Defense Department did in various technologies. Or right now, when the government of India is trying to invite semiconductor fabrication facilities into India, it's simply not possible without some part of investment being provided by the government itself. And again, I think the second point which Nitin made in a lighter vein, which is that we are oblivious of rules in India until the point when the government tells you what not to do. to a large extent, it mirrors the situation in Israel. When I came here, I was told there's a saying in Hebrew. I hope I'm recalling it correctly. It meant something like "Ma yodea," or "What does he know?" We have a similar culture in India. And I see, Ambassador Proso, behind you are small statuettes of owls in various forms.
This is my wife, you see, the wise.
The reason I mention that is in India, owls are regarded as symbols of wisdom. In a way, it's also parallel to the government. Most of the time, we look at it in sort of mock disdain, etc. But in times of trouble, that's where we turn to and pray. So I fully agree with the larger sentiment that's been expressed here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So just before so we'll go to the geopolitical question that I asked Ambassador Proso and Nitin, but before that, I'd ask you to be brief as we want to leave 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. We have many questions coming in already. So Nitin, would you like to begin?
Let me just make an intervention. See, I think what we are seeing in terms of high technology and geopolitics, and part of the reason we are having this conversation with our Israeli friends, is that high technology has moved from being a factor in geopolitics, I think, to becoming the most important issue in geopolitics in the next 10 to 20 years. And I think India and Israel must consult very closely on this, because there are four big trends which I will quickly, I'll just mention them, no time to go through in detail. But the first one is the splintering of cyberspace, where a bamboo curtain of sorts is falling in place, where China is trying to carve out its own cyberspace with its own norms, technologies, and investments, and so on. The second is transnational technology platforms have acquired political power. And around the world, we see the legislatures trying to control Twitter, Facebook, Google, etc., using antitrust, free speech laws, and so on. And the actions in the United States in this month tells us how much political power they wield. And this dynamic between the nation state and the technology platform is going to become very intense in the next 10 years. And then, of course, we have the challenge of radically networked societies as ICT gets into the pockets and into the wrists of every single citizen. The way politics changes is going to be very interesting and poses massive challenges for the world order itself. And finally, there is cyber strategy, including defensive and offensive cyber capabilities. The rules of the game are coming into place. They are evolving. And I think India and Israel need to consult deeply with each other in order to shape the rules of the road for the coming future. And these are not going to be mere incremental changes, but we are looking at a point where there will be disruptive changes to the world order coming from technology. And I think India and Israel, as sharing both values and interests, must cooperate to find answers and evolve answers to this.
Ambassador?
I would like to raise an issue. We have been, for years, conventional wisdom was basically telling us that the multilateral structures have a lot of logic. Let's take the European Union, let's take NATO, let's take ASEAN. Basically, when you look now at how the world had to reacted to COVID-19, we see something which is very interesting that I think everyone watches and has to find answers to. For example, the UN was very, very important. I can't believe I'm saying the word UN, efficient and important in one sentence. This is an oxymoron by definition. But when there was Ebola and it was focused on one regional area, the multilateral structures worked quite well, okay? When suddenly the whole world is infected, if you are part of the European Union and you were told and educated, basically, and for all the relevant economic reasons why it makes sense, when you are under pressure, if you're an Italian or a Spaniard, and you really are dying out there, and the European Union closes the borders, and basically you are out there alone. So not connected with different political settings of nationalistic feelings, the structures, the multilateral structures that we thought are giving us answers to nearly anything are being challenged. If I remember correctly, also in ASEAN, India worked alone, Singapore worked alone, Taiwan worked alone, and Japan worked alone. So in the sense, what we see is a challenge to the structures that we have to find new answers to. I'm seeking to look at things because, of course, it's obvious that there's a lot of merit in working together, but we see also the importance of creating independent structures on a national base that can give you and your population an answers in time of crisis, okay? So this is a point that I think is worth looking at beyond the issue of what Nitin mentioned, which I think is absolutely true. And this is the challenge that we see coming from China on nearly all parameters that are connected clearly with technology, with micro, in the sense when I looked at the microchips and technology, and I have my good friend Bilhari in Singapore made it a point on what the importance of nanotechnology and how China on that part needs to still catch up. But you see huge, I think, implications to how the world is going to function. And one thing that I want to add, Nitin, on the issue of Twitter or Facebook. Everyone is happy or not happy, depends on his political affiliation. The fact that Twitter or Facebook closed Trump's ability to tweet. But then we have to ask ourselves, who is going to decide? Twitter is going to decide. Zuckerberg is going to decide for me what is right and wrong, what is false or true. If we had to close, anything on TV every time a politician would be lying, we would be, with dark computers and TV systems. But my point is, who is going to decide? It cannot be someone like Zuckerberg or the head of Twitter. That's my point.
Thank you, Ambassador. I mean, this leads us well to some questions that we're receiving from the audience. One of our audience asked, does China figure in the India-Israel relationship, and how? Nitin, can I ask you to share some thoughts on that, more specifically?
Thank you. See, I think if you look at it in a classic sense, the India-US, the India-Israel relationship is the India-Israel relationship. It's bilateral. It's meant to advance the interests of both countries. It's meant to advance, prosperity, development of Indians. I mean, although the India-Israel relationship is seen from a foreign policy angle, I think what happens in the developmental context is phenomenal. Just in Karnataka, we have agriculture, which is, using low water intensity agriculture. And that's a tremendous kind of innovation. And that's a tremendous kind of economic activity that is, connecting the two countries. So in a classic sense, I wouldn't look at any other third country being sort of a factor any more or less than any fourth or fifth country. Having said that, in the high technology space, I think moving forward, India and Israel will have to move beyond bilateral to something which we could probably call extralateral or extra bilateral, wherein we've spent many years now, 2 or 3 decades now, figuring out what we can do with each other. But I think we've now built enough trust And we've built enough political and economic constituencies to now venture beyond the bilateral relationship and see how can we shape the world in a way that is consistent with our interests and values. And in that context, I think it's important, I think China would figure, because we are both looking at a nation state which has a very different view of what international norms should be, what domestic norms should be, what the relationship between the citizen and the state should be. And I think India and Israel share a very strong value system and interests in not being part of that kind of an ecosystem. And moving forward, I do think this will be the case. But I think we should still look at, for the large part, look at a bilateral relationship, from its own value. It has its own value. And I don't think we should necessarily connect it with third or fourth countries.
Thank you. Ambassador Proso, would you like to comment on that and in general about how you see the Israel-India relationship in the context of the superpower competition or the superpower dynamic?
Yes, I think it's not just fair to say, but it's true that India and Israel are, in essence, allies of the United States of America for different reasons. But in the sense we are different because of our size. When the United States of America wanted India to play as a counterbalance to China, after what Vajpayee did in the past by testing, where India in this sense was sanctions on India, the American administration opened up the NSG, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and basically gave India exactly what it needed because it saw it as a counterbalance to China, okay? But in the sense, an ally, both from a democratic point of view, both its size and also it's as a global player beyond the non-alignment movement, okay? Israel is an ally that has to navigate as a zodiac in comparison to an aircraft carrier. The navigation skills of a zodiac are much more problematic. When we look at China, we see China's attitudes towards Israel and Jews very positive. No baggage, what we see, for example, in Europe. On the contrary, huge, connection to what Jews stand for, what Israel stands for. Not that it has any, complete merit on how their voting patterns or how their attitude towards Israel in international forums. But in the sense, what we're going to see, I think, now is the United States of America going to challenge its allies, or not challenge, basically say the following. India and Israel, let me talk about Israel. Dear friends, if you think that the Chinese are going to come to Palo Alto and seek for technology and we say no, and then they come to Herzliya or Bangalore, well, you can be mistaken here. You Israelis and Ambassador Malka and on Proso, you always repeat qualitative military edge. That's very, very nice. But now we come to you and say, we want to talk about qualitative technological edge. So you guys have to decide here, where are you going? And we have to create the structures that will allow us, Israel as a zodiac, to navigate, needing the Chinese market and needing, of course, the American market, that if Israel had to make a choice, the obvious is the United States of America. But we have to create an investment structures, like the same way that we have export controls, investment controls to allow us to navigate. I think the same would be applied to India on certain issues, and we have to look at that coming, especially now with the Biden administration, on coming to its allies and saying allies is very nice, the United Kingdom, 5G and Huawei, Canada, Australia, Israel, India, a lot of eyes out there, and we have to watch it because I think, rightly so, we will be challenged very soon on this.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have several questions about the Abraham Accords and the paradigm shift that we see in the Middle East. How do you think Israel and India can cooperate in the new evolving Middle East? Nitin, would you like to start?
Yeah, see, I think from a very broad standpoint, India's interests are to have, lie in pursuing independent good relations with all the key players in the Persian Gulf and the Middle Eastern region. And because of the unique politics of the place, sometimes, and at certain times and certain occasions, this becomes a little tricky. But I think overall, India is large enough a geopolitical entity, large enough an economy, and large enough a cultural construct to be able to independently engage all the important players in the Middle East. I think one of the things which I see personally is the region is still dealing with the consequences of the United States acquiring energy independence. And those, although it's not spoken of as much, the United States acquired energy independence, I think, about 5 to 6 years ago, and is not dependent on the oil-rich, states of the Middle East as it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. And this has consequences. It means the United States might not necessarily want to play as strong a role in stabilizing the region as it wanted to maybe 15 years ago. And then what does the region look out? Where does the region look out to for security guarantees and for stability? So China is definitely one of the places which they would look to. And I would think they would look to India as one of the other players who would be involved in playing the role of a stabilizer of the region. Now, I'm not sure how much of an interest India will have to be as involved in the matters of the Middle East as the United States used to be, or probably China is trying to be. But what I can say that it is certainly in our interests to have a multi-pronged outreach to every significant player and be a positive contributor to the balance of power in the Middle East. It might not necessarily be a central role, it's not a role that is in the center stage, but it's a useful supporting role in ensuring that the Middle East becomes a stable place. And I think we've seen enough of bitterness and violence and destruction in the region. And most of us in India would wish the Middle East well in, overcoming the problems of the past and stabilizing for the future.
Thank you. Ambassador Proso, you want to add to that?
Yes, I think what we see in the Sunnite Arab world is a change in paradigm. Basically saying Israel is part of the solution, not part of the problem. Yes, we have to thank the Iranians. No one has ever done so much to bring Israel and the Arab world together than the Iranians. So first, we have to thank them. But in addition to that, you basically see, I think the paradigm shift is understanding that by engaging with Israel, you can influence Israel's policy more than by sitting on the balcony and shouting, it's a lousy show. The idea of annexation, yes or no, is a good example for that. And I think when you look at both Egypt and Jordan, and especially when I look at Jordan, the influence of the fact that you have relations with Israel and you can influence that, I think is a change in a paradigm shift, where the whole issue of the recognition of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people in the Arab world is now, I think, quite a reality, which wasn't the case in the past. Amazingly, and this is the most important thing to me, is the people-to-people element. In the Gulf, both in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Bahrain, but you see the people-to-people element. So it's not just between governments, or it's not just between defense establishments. Those are the real pillars that can create this relationship. And if I had to brand it for you, we should be looking for new structures. So instead of having the quartet work at the Middle East, we should have the Arab quartet. Hence, I think the importance of having Egypt, Jordan, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, or Saudi Arabia giving the structure or the, embracing something on the bilateral relations that, or trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I think is obvious that this is not a major conflict in the Middle East, although people tried to push that in the past. So what I see in the sense is a new structure, a new paradigm shift, and I hope it will enlarge, because by enlarging that, the support around creating a different reality in the Middle East would be much stronger. So I think it's an amazing breakthrough.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We're almost out of time, so I just would like to say a few words from our side. I think what you all said is very relevant, and we'll be looking both to enhancing bilateral relations and bilateral cooperation, and also trying to think of new ideas for regional and multilateral cooperation as well in the coming weeks. Our next event will be on the 18th of February, and we'll focus on 5G. We'll be sending out more information shortly about that, so please make sure to register to our newsletters and our updates. Thank you so much again for a fascinating conversation and for a fantastic launch to this effort. Thank you, Ambassador Sanjeev, Ambassador Malka, Nitin Pai, and Ambassador Proso, of course. And we're looking forward to continuing the conversation and to going deeper into the details, into the practicalities. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, and shalom, and hope to see you both in Bangalore and Ron in New Delhi.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.